All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to talk to you about the Tutu Launch Lab today. The title of our talk is called That's a Wrap, and it has been a wrap. We've recently wrapped the conclusion of our first ever Tutu Launch Lab mentorship cohort. And today I'm joined with two of my fellow mentors, Jana Carlson and Amy Simon. And some of our mentees are with us today. And we wanted to just tell you all a little bit about what we did. And we're planning to relaunch it again in 2025. And so it's so weird to say that. I think for a minute what year we're in, where we're going. But we just wrapped this up last week, and so it's fresh on our minds, and wanted to kind of share what we were all about with you all in the Writers Bloc, and those of you who might be listening on our podcast at some point. So we named this entire mentorship program the Tutu Launch Lab, which is kind of a funny name, but we had intentionality behind it. It's based on the verse Habakkuk 2:2, which says, the Lord said to the prophet Habakkuk, write the vision, make it plain, so that he who reads it may run. And so we took that verse as kind of a three-part formula for a way of learning how to write for the glory of the Lord and for the benefit of others. And we structured our entire program around this three-part verse. And we called it the Tutu Launch Lab, thinking that at the end of this 6-month program, that our mentees would have the tools needed to really launch and take off in their own writing journeys. So this began back in, gosh, when was it? Like September-ish of last year. We started planning and kind of creating this curriculum. We marketed it in October and November, closed our doors in December, and we launched and officially started in January. And we just finished last week. So I'm going to go through right now and just kind of lay out a very high level vision of what we did and give each of my fellow mentors an opportunity to talk as well. And then we just have some questions and answers we wanted to talk to our mentees about, kind of get their take on what they thought of it, and then open it up for questions too at the end. So using that Habakkuk 2:2 verse, our first section of our time together was over the months of January and February, and that was our Write the Vision modules. And that was really dedicated to kind of laying the groundwork for what it meant to write for God's glory. That was the Lord's instruction to the prophet Habakkuk to write down the vision that God had given him. So we wanted to really empower our mentees with just a biblical theological framework of what that means to write for God's glory. So Jana walked us through that and gave us a great apologetic for the worthiness of the endeavor of writing, Christian writing for the benefit of others. We also really talked about this writing the vision requires us to know ourselves better and also to know our ideal reader better. So Amy also talked to us quite a bit about how to identify our reader and our message. Who is it that we're talking to? We did a lot of exercises around identifying who that person is. Oftentimes it's a younger version of ourselves. Sometimes it's somebody in particular in our circles of influence that we know and we're writing to. And so it helps us clarify our message when we really have an idea of who that person is and what their needs are. And then we also talked a little bit about knowing who we are ourselves as writers. And we went through a tool that it helped us learn more about ourselves, kind of what our strengths and weaknesses are, and how we can kind of compensate for that and help really not work against the grain of how God made us, but also to know ourselves better in order that we can be more effective and productive for the kingdom and for people. And so that was January and February.
Well, and then in March, we looked at, okay, if this is the person I'm writing for and the message that I'm writing, where am I going to put that writing? Where is the actual platform online where we're going to put that? So we talked about pros and cons between having your own personal website versus using a tool or platform like Substack. And we kind of customized that based on, because each of our mentees was in a little bit of a different place. Some of them had a website, some of them didn't. And so we talked about how to use some of those different tools and what would be the next best step for each one of them as far as where to actually put their writing. We talked a little bit about social media and how that can be a great way to invite people in, not a necessary way, but a possible way, but that's really not the landing place, because we don't own that. We don't have all the control over that, but that we ultimately want to get our content onto a website or someplace like Substack. And then in April, excuse me, in April, Cara talked all about designing your own brand. So both from a physical, like graphics, colors, logos, things like that, as well as the actual words. Like, are there phrases that we use? Are there, what is the feel that we want that, again, matches who we are, but also is going to be attractive to our reader. And so she provided this beautiful style guide that mentees walked through to kind of put some of those things together to be able to present our message in a way that is cohesive and attractive, is authentic to who we are, and also is interesting for our reader and would attract them and say, hey, you're the one I'm writing for. So that was March and April.
And then the last 2 months, we focused on promotion and community. So we had written the vision, we had made it plain, and now it was time for us to figure out how to run with it, according to the outline in Habakkuk. And so we looked at how Jesus handled platform. We spent some time in the Bible and we tried to answer the question of how can we as Christian writers build a platform that glorifies God instead of exalting ourselves. And so we took some practical lessons from the life of Jesus. And then we also looked at community, the blessing of community, as well as the pitfalls of community, including things like vulnerability or comparison, pride, things like that. And then we also presented a roadmap to your first 100 email subscribers. So we talked about different, as Amy shared, different ways or different platforms to build on. But we emphasized the value of an email list and then also provided tools to grow that email list to your first 100 subscribers, and also explored ways of actually connecting with those readers, going beyond just producing content and actually cultivating engagement, cultivating that community with your readers. And that was our last 2 months.
Yeah, so you can probably tell, like, we bit off a lot in that 6 months, and we can hear from our mentees in a little bit to see how they felt about that. But I wanted to just talk to Jana and Amy a little bit more before we got to them, and just kind of ask you guys, as we're all writers ourselves, we're all kind of in different spaces, alike but different spaces of our own writing journeys. And what did you guys, this is kind of a on the fly question, but what did you guys learn? How did it affect you to kind of pour your life, your experience into this program and into these mentees?
I think one of the things that stood out to me, both in giving and in, my own writing journey, is that it's one thing to have information about how to do something, it's one thing to have taken classes and learned all of this stuff. But it's really a different thing to actually go through and apply it. And I remember when I was doing some of my prep for my own teaching, I was tempted to skip over some things. I'm like, well, I think these guys have all heard this before. And it seemed that it was helpful, even though they had heard it before, because it's a different thing when someone actually walks alongside you and holds your feet to the fire sometimes and says, hey, how is this going? And I think I will apply that in my own life too, because there are plenty of things in writing that, okay, yes, I know that this is the right way to do this, or what, excuse me, what my next step needs to be. But it's so helpful to have someone walk alongside you, even if it's just an accountability partner or, just someone to walk with you and say, hey, how is that going, by the way?
Yeah, in a way, there's a bit of an accountability for us as mentors too, right? Because we think we're providing accountability to them, but in the meantime, we're also being held to account, and you learn differently when you're having to teach something too. Like you really have to like personalize what you're learning. How about you, Jana? Could you add anything or have other thoughts about that?
I think probably, oh my goodness, there's so much I could say. I think something that really blessed me throughout the 6 months was the encouragement I got by watching the mentees persevere through some of the challenges,
Mhm.
and then to see the fruit. And that encouraged me personally, that like to live that out in my own life. Um, and I guess I would echo what Amy said, like it ties in with that, our teaching on the blessing of community. Like there is definitely mutual benefit of being accountable to each other, but also just the encouragement of from each other, and rejoicing with those who rejoice,
Mhm.
and helping to lighten the load from someone who maybe is struggling. Um, but also in preparing to teach, as Amy said as well, like as mentors, we're mentors, but that doesn't mean that we have like arrived, or that we're that we don't need to improve anymore. And
Right.
I personally, in my own writing life in these last 6 months, like I feel like I've basically gone through the launch lab myself, even though I've done this all again. Teaching it reminded me, like, oh, I need to be evaluating some of these things again, and just recognizing some things about how I'm wired, and like, okay, so maybe I need to tweak my approach to my own platform building a little bit, to better align with my current season of life and with who I am at this stage in my life. And that that really made a big difference in my personal life in the last 6 months, and has kind of changed the way I spend my days, to be honest. Um, yeah, it took some pressure off, and yeah, I found it very rewarding.
Oh, that's really exciting. That was my experience as well. I feel like I'm very connected to the Writers Bloc community, but there was something really sweet and really special about this launch lab, because it was like it was the next level of community. And I wanted to talk to the mentees about that too, and kind of get your experience, having been on both sides. You've been in the writer's block, both of you, since day one. But then you both saw something in your own writing journey that you felt like you needed a little bit more support. There were some areas that you felt might have been missing or lacking, or you needed clarity on. And so, how was the launch lab different for you, from being just in the writer's block? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Go ahead, Cheryl. I nominate you.
Okay, I was giving you a chance to
Who's gonna
jump
be
in.
first?
It's funny because I was thinking about that this morning, that being part of the Writers Bloc really laid a nice foundation for joining this Launch Lab community, because I felt like I knew the mentors kind of already. Like I had seen your work, I was already familiar with your faces and your the things you would share, you know, in the feed and things like that. So the opportunity to walk closely with you, like Amy said, in mentorship for accountability was just wonderful, because I already knew you guys were solid. You know, like Jana said, it's a journey, and I know you guys are in your own journey, but you're far enough ahead of me. Just like when you have small children and you pair up with a friend whose kids are a little bit older, and you kind of watch them as so you kind of know what's coming. I felt like it was kind of like that relationship. And so it was really wonderful to, because I already trusted you, you know?
Mm.
And so that really helped. That was like a no-brainer. Oh, definitely, I'm going to join this and learn from them.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
thought
Cheryl.
too, being in the Launch Lab or being in the Writers Block and having those Tuesday teachings, gave me a good start on, organizing my writing life, figuring out what I was really wanting to do, what God was calling me to do. We got a teaser of that in all the Tuesday teachings, and that was very valuable. And the opportunity to go deeper and to have a little bit more one-on-one attention for myself, just some help and some guidance, and really, I don't know if it was Amy or Cara that said that the clarity that came with really thinking about it for myself. I thought everybody was in a little bit different place in their own writing journey of the mentees, and that was really valuable for me to see, watching. Cheryl's a little farther ahead of me, and so was Amber in there. The idea behind their website, what their point was, what their message was, things like that. And it was neat to see how they were refining and tweaking things based on what we were learning. And I was working on, well, really, who is that reader, and which message am I really going to go after? Because I write kind of a lot of different things. So for me, that the clarity that came from just having like a little more guidance in how to figuring out the next steps was really what was appealing to me, based from what I had learned in the Writer's Block versus joining the Launch Lab. It was like, okay, here's the next steps that are going to work for me, or suggestions that work for me. And that was really, really valuable.
That's awesome. And so, you guys had this unique perspective of already kind of knowing us and kind of understanding a little bit about what we were about. And you also both kind of identified like there was a need that you were having that wasn't being completely fulfilled in the Writer's Block. You needed a little bit more one-on-one attention. Do you feel like for the future and the people who hopefully will hear about the Launch Lab in the future, would this be valuable to somebody who didn't already have a familiarity with the Writer's Block? And why do you think it hopefully would?
Yeah, I think so. I think because it's so approachable, because it's Writer's Block has kind of like a neighborhood feel. You know, you feel like it's um there's an approachable factor to it. Everyone is friendly, everyone is at different levels, but we're all encouraging each other. It's a very safe place. So to jump right into the Launch Lab, I think you get that same feel. And then, if someone wasn't familiar with Writer's Block, it'd just be an easy transition, because there are so many resources, familiar faces, so much to gain from it. I think it's definitely a benefit.
Yeah, and you get that Writer's Block in addition when you join the Launch Lab, right? Because even if you all weren't in the Writer's Block beforehand, that was included in the price, and so you do get that exposure and get that fuller sense of community. Were you going to say something, Kathy?
Oh, yeah, just the spaces in the Writer's Block, the Fiction Square, the Inklings Pub, places like that where sometimes depending on where you hang out, you meet different people because that's the things that they're, that they're interested in, growing in their own backyard. And I think in the Launch Lab, that's a space where kind of you're watching what other people are doing, but you're also able to work more on your own things too. So it's just, it is another space that I think it's just maybe has a little more intent to it than some of the neighborhood spaces in the Writers Bloc, which I love, because if I want to talk about books, I go to the reading corner. If I want to, if I want to interact with people who are writing fiction, we hang out in the fiction square, and that, kind of those special interest places are very attractive to me as a Writers Bloc member, but the Launch Lab was attractive to me as a developing writer. So
That's so encouraging. And, we talked in our last teaching, we talked about some of the pitfalls of community. And I think one of the ones that I know I struggle with, I think probably most of us do, is that does the need to be vulnerable. And I think even like it was a bit smaller, right? There's less risk. Maybe if you're feeling a little self-conscious about being vulnerable, about raising your hand and saying, I need help with this. Like, this was a really safe place to be vulnerable and to ask questions. And you both have said, like, everyone was at different places. Like, and that was kind of the beauty of it, like to be in a really great functioning mentorship relationship. You don't have to be like side by side with somebody. You just need somebody a few steps ahead of you. To help you kind of get over those hurdles that you're facing.
and even for somebody that was more like Cheryl was working on something that's a few steps ahead of where I was, but as a reader audience, I could give feedback from that perspective, so even though I wasn't at the same spot, I still had something I felt I could contribute, in terms of helping with feedback or impression or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was neat. It didn't always feel like I wasn't just that little kid trying to catch up. I had my own, I felt good about having things that I could offer and support in the community, as well as being supported in the things that I was struggling with. I got great advice from people who had been there and done that, of the places that I was struggling.
You're a wonderful editor, Kathy.
Thank you.
I was going to say too, I think like for someone who was not already part of the Writers Bloc, but jumps right into the Launch Lab, I think somewhat like sometimes, I mean, the Writers Bloc isn't an enormous community. I would definitely not say it's overwhelming, but there are a lot of different places to go and things to do. And, I suppose it could feel like, okay, where do I start? What do I do next? Like, how do I engage? The Launch Lab could provide kind of okay, this is a step-by-step, we are taking you through something. It's a way to get to know people, to get to know the space, maybe in a smaller, more interconnected with others kind of way, so that then, you can engage in the Writers Bloc larger community and feel like, oh yes, I know these people, and I don't know, have a little more of a focus on knowing how to use that community to your advantage. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And, I think it was mentioned earlier about, Jana had said, watching you mentees persevere was really inspiring. I think anything that you take on that scares you a little bit is probably a really good thing, right? You need to have that enough challenge provided and kind of built into a program that it's going to stretch you, but it shouldn't discourage you. It should be something where you feel that tension of like, oh, this is difficult, but I want to keep going, and yet it needs to feel like it's within reach. And we have some other mentees who weren't able to join us here today, but I mean, there was the gamut of challenges that were among us. I mean, there was there was lots of travel, there was family issues, and work issues. And so could you guys speak a little bit to like what were the biggest challenges for you, either like, and maybe even were the challenges that you experienced what you expected them to be, or was there a switcheroo somewhere where you're like, oh wow, I didn't expect this, but this is what is hard for me right now? Who wants to go first? Cheryl,
I'm
go
trying to
for it.
think. I everything was stretchy. Everything, but the accountability is the key there, because if I was on my own working on something and hit a wall, I would just shut down and walk away. But knowing that someone was going to ask me about it, and knowing that also that someone would help me if I needed it, was key. That was huge. So I mean, there were some things that were a little, and some of that's just my own, like the branding element, and picking from all those choices of colors, logos. You guys saw how many logos I tried first before I got the right one. It's like, that can be overwhelming, but that's where I had to kind of go back and read my own writing about, perfectionism, and not making that a god or an idol.
Yeah.
Just going with something. And so that was good for me. That kind of stretched me within my own comfort zone, or out of my comfort zone anyway. So
Yeah, that was a difficult module, and we did probably take off, bit off a bit more than we can chew. We're going to make some adjustments for that in the future. But yeah, that whole branding module was really, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, they're just chomping at the bit to get to the fun stuff. And really like we placed that in the curriculum and in the scope and sequence, if you will, to come after we had done some of that foundational work of who you are as a writer, who you're talking to, what your message is about. And then we were trying to make it plain, right? Like that's an area of writing that a lot of writers are just like, I just want to write. Why do I have to be a brand as well? And so we tried to kind of lay the foundation of it's a brand is a shortcut for your brain. And so we're trying to help you as the writer be sticky in somebody else's mind for the problem that you're solving. And so while it is fun, I think it can get the best of us sometimes, and especially those of us who really want to get it just right. It is like an evolving process, and so that is a bit of a challenge sometimes. Kathy, do you have anything to add in terms of like what you felt was like, did it feel like an appropriate amount of challenge to you? I know you're still working through some of it, and that's great, but what are your thoughts on that?
Um, because I was kind of right at the beginning of that, clarifying my reader and my message, the branding was a little overwhelming for me. And to have you be able to say, you don't need to worry about that just yet. Branding is as much, the foundation of branding is as much about your voice and your, who your readers think you are. And one of your challenges was to have us go meet like one of our in real life readers, or our in real life avatars, and ask them what they think of you, what they think of your writing, how we can serve them better. And I know I took my daughter-in-law's mom and I we're in the same age bracket, and kind of same time. Like, we went out for coffee and we just talked about, well, what would be helpful to you, what do you enjoy reading about, what would be, and it was nice to be able to pick somebody's brain up, and kind of do those lessons that we talk about, but able to go and actually do it. And then I could come back and say, okay, right now my brand doesn't need to be the logos and the colors. My brand needs to be what my tone is going to be, how often I'm going to publish, how, I'm not quite at the point where the schedule I'd like to be on for publishing on my blog or whatever is not quite where I want it to be yet. But I'm also planning a wedding, and we've had 8 weeks of renovation at my office. So I think for the first 4 meetings, I was in a different coffee shop every time we met, because somebody was drilling or hammering or laying tile or doing something. And so that I just had a lot of, I didn't think I was going to have so much external distraction when I started. So I was a little disappointed that I didn't seem to make as much progress as I thought I would, but I still crafted better writing habits, just, and just having, 4 pages worth of topics that I brainstormed. Oh, here's a day that let's brainstorm some
right.
topics. And it was having somebody to say, yeah, use that as a homework assignment. And maybe you don't do the branding packet right now because you're not there yet. That's okay. And so a lot of my biggest problems are I have a lot of great ideas and I don't know where to start. And then I'm trying to do everything all at once. And you guys were great at saying, just pick one next step. Just, what's the most logical thing for you to work on next, and it may or may not be the easiest thing, but what's the most logical thing that will advance you the furthest. So some of that is still, that's why I say I still have some homework assignments outstanding that I'm planning to get to. I just wasn't ready for all that yet. I could take the Launch Lab again, and get a little farther in the actual homework and modules than I did. I don't think it's a one and done. I think sometimes it might be valuable to go back and, and see where I am the next time around.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope that whoever's listening to this can kind of apply some of this to your own life and to your own writing practice, because like this is what real life, I mean, I felt like this is what we were doing together. This was like real life. We were all kind of aware of what some of the extenuating circumstances were in your lives, and yet we saw each of you like really persevere despite, wishing that, you had more time in your day and your week to get things done. And that's just life, right? Like that's just never going to be perfect. Where you've got all the time that you need to get all of the homework done, and that you don't have extenuating circumstances and distractions happening around you. But we saw you guys all really persevere and do what you could, right? There wasn't a grade involved in your participation in the Launch Lab. So Rosemary asked a really great question. How many hours a week would you say you gave to the Launch Lab? So yeah, let me just, before we answer that question, the way it was set up was we had a teaching on a Monday, and that was an hour-long teaching, and then followed by a group coaching call 2 weeks later. So we met twice a month for 2 hours together, and we had lots of interaction online in our own private space within the Writers Bloc. But mentees, like, what do you think in terms of outside of Launch Lab? How much time per week on average do you think you were doing with homework and or maybe reviewing teaching, that kind of thing?
I think I would say, because I'm at a place in my life where I have 2 to 3 days a week that I can set aside for writing. And I know that's not true for everybody. So I would say, like, I know at least one day a week was set aside for doing all of that. So that could be like 4 to 6 hours. But then, and then if I felt like I needed to work on other things, I would do those on my other writing days. But so does that help?
Yeah.
It is a little hard to quantify for me too, because part of my gaining clarity was realizing how much more I had to develop that writing habit. So for me, I was adding an extra, day a week of, this afternoon I was at the coffee shop and I was writing, or this morning I'm going to work on some of the homework questions or homework assignments and things like that. So probably for me in the 2 to 4 hour a week range for actual like writing stuff, but mentally in my head, I was working through a lot, being able to just even the consideration of, well, what other topics might be a content, or I just had coffee with a friend, and what part of her life could I speak to, and things like that. So I found that mentally I did a lot more brain work on it, even though I wouldn't necessarily count that as hours worked. It was definitely my asking the Lord to help me see where I could be of use and help and that sort of thing.
That's really great, because that's part of what we were hoping for, is that it wouldn't just be like this solitary, extracted activity from your everyday life, but integrated.
I was going to say that's a really good point, Kathy, because it was a lot of brain work that was more constant, but it was good because I felt stimulated. I knew what I was supposed to be thinking about rather than having, like you said, a gazillion ideas floating around in my head. It was like, this week I'm thinking about this, so that was a good way to put it.
Well, and I saw that with what you produced, even on your blog, Cheryl, because you did, I mean, you put a couple of series together where your posts were all connected, and it was, oh, here's a way to structure your content that hopefully you write things once, but you make 4 or 5 posts out of it, or however that works. For me, I learned a lot about the processes of writing as well as, the actual skills.
That's so great. We saw in our mentees just a real variety of wins. One of them started a Substack and got a logo for the first time. Another one really worked on, she was feeling like her blog was going in one direction and felt like maybe she'd outgrown that message and was trying to pivot. And we spent a lot of time talking with her about like the whole like pivoting of her message. And then we had another one who was just, grinding it out, really trying to stick with it through a lot of extenuating circumstances that were happening in her life, but she managed to keep going and keep up. What would you guys say were some of your big wins? And we'd like to hear, like, maybe based on maybe where you were at the beginning and where you feel like you are now too, as well.
I don't always have to go first, Kathy. You can go if you want.
Well, honestly, for me, one of the biggest things, I realized a lot of what tended to hold me back was all imposter syndrome. A lot of the things that I felt I couldn't do or wasn't qualified, or all those things, when you parse it down, it's that fear of not being, adequate or whatever. And so part of the launch lab of that writing, that focus, those the lessons on what Jesus did with his platform and writing for God's glory. And those things really spoke to me about, it's not, I don't have to be a Nobel Prize winning, author. Somebody somewhere is, if I have a sincere heart and I'm open to what the Lord is telling me to say, he's telling me to say it to benefit someone else somewhere. So, and I may never know who that person is or how it affects them, but that's not what I'm in it for. So that was a really nice revelation to me. And just getting past the who are you to think you can do this phase.
Right.
And doesn't it take pressure off too, Kathy? Like, it's, I think a lot of that is like, God is working, right? Even we get so caught up in all of the mechanics of it sometimes, and he's just like, write the message, make it plain that she may read, that she who reads it may run, right? That's the whole idea. And that imposter syndrome, I know it affects us all in one way or another, but it often just keeps us from doing anything. And I saw you really make a lot of strides in that direction, for sure.
And just to piggyback on that, Kathy, all it takes is one person to respond back and say, this really spoke to me this week. Just that carries, when that happens to me, it carries me for a month. It's like, okay, this is worth it. This is worth it. Because really, that's all we want to do is just point people to Christ. But anyway, so for me, when we started, I'd been dabbling for a while. I self-published a book last year and then set up a basic website, but was really getting bogged down by all the little things, the newsletter, the social media, the email list, and it just, I didn't know which step to take next. So this really lined things up for me. But key was honing in for real on my message and reader, because I had kind of a general idea of what I was writing about, who I was writing for. But Amy helped us really hone in on that. And that took up a lot of brain space, but then it all came together, and then that just caused an explosion of ideas for topics for blog posts and articles. And so that was super helpful. And even creating a little avatar person of who my reader is. And then the suggestion to go out to coffee with someone in real life that you think fits this description. That was very eye-opening too, and very sweet, because then you can put a face to that person that you're writing for as you write. So those were huge wins. Just clarifying that message and who I'm writing for. So whenever I sit down now, I think about that person and that message.
Well, and I want to brag a little on Cheryl too, because her platform is about avoiding perfectionism, right? And yet you can see she was like a straight A student in school.
Yeah.
She did all of her assignments and turned them in early, I'm sure. But she really took all of it very seriously, and that was really fun to, not that anyone didn't, but you got out of your comfort zone. I know that you did, and we had a challenge of to get your first 100 email subscribers. Now I don't know if they were your first, but she went out and she personally asked many of her friends, here's what I'm doing, would you be interested in subscribing to my blog? And she reached that 100 mark, and so we just celebrated with her, because it is like a snowball that starts to roll downhill. At first you have to push it up the hill, and then eventually it does start to roll down. And that was really encouraging for us as mentors to see you really take that challenge really seriously, and get some of those like number wins, because those feel really good too.
Yeah. And it was funny because I was so intimidated, so worried about coming across as salesy. Jana knows that I don't want to be like this, like when Amway people come to your house and try to sell you Amway, whatever, I thought you were just my friend and you're just trying to sell me something.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to come across like that. But when I looked, you guys always made it personal. Take a real person out to coffee, reach out to someone you know in real life that is reading your stuff on social media, but they're not subscribed to you, so that's kind of what I did in it. And I always started with a little personal note, and then said, you might like what I'm writing about, or would you be interested in checking this out? And so many people responded so positively. So it really kind of took away when you put a real face to it, real people to it, rather than thinking you're just shouting into this crowd of anonymous people. It makes a difference. It really does. And so that was exciting, because I always joke that my first readers were my mom and all her friends. That was about my audience. So it was like, okay, I've got some different people now.
That's so great. That's so great. Well, we'll wrap this up here in a few minutes, but what would you say to somebody who might be thinking and toying with the idea of joining the Launch Lab the next time it's offered in 2025? This will be open for enrollment before 2025, but will begin in January of next year. So what would you say to somebody who might be sitting on the fence about joining us?
I think that it's a way for you to invest in your own writing and to see how God can use you. I like the fact that after Cara didn't say it, but after our teaching, or after our group coaching session, we would have like the L10, we'd have a form that we could put down our next steps, or what we thought the next steps would be, or the things we're struggling with. And we kind of kept track for each other of the things we were working on, and it provided accountability, but it also was a place to score some of those wins. And we could see, oh, look at how far I came from the the first sheet that I filled out to the last one, there were always chances to, oh, I forgot to ask this question, or, oh, could somebody give me some feedback, a week and a half in before we meet the next time. So just that level of just personal, help and somebody really just walking with you was huge in terms of boosting my confidence, and feeling like, I was really learning something that was, honed to what I needed at the time, and everybody else at the same time was learning what they needed to learn. And so that, I just think that level of just, personal, I did my first group coaching ever last summer, with a 6-week group coaching thing, and I loved it. It was really nice. And so I was much more open to something like, I thought 6 weeks was a lot. And then here comes this 6-month mentorship. And I thought, yeah, you know what? That's okay. It's enough time. It was enough time to do things in between. So it wasn't like you were piling your assignments one on top of the other. You had a good month to think about each topic. And so it didn't feel like 6 months. It felt like enough time to really start to learn, and apply what I was learning, and have time to get some feedback and some personal attention. And also felt quite loved.
That's really
For
encouraging.
sure. I would definitely say you get the value is just right. You get your money's worth. You really do, because it's individualized attention, for right where you are. You take us back to the basics. Okay, what is your message and reader? And maybe someone's going to join that already has that figured out, but they need help like with the website or, platform things, or whatever. But it's definitely worth it. And it will, like anything, you get out of it what you put into it. So you have to, I was like, okay, if I'm going to pay for this, I'm going to use it. I'm going to get out of it as much as I can. And definitely got more than that, just because of the friendship, the camaraderie, the encouragement, being able to watch my friends learn and grow. It is so fun too. That was worth it too, but definitely valuable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you both were talking about just the friendship element and being in those group coaching calls. In a way, those were my favorite, because I loved seeing the mentees like counsel each other. And it really wasn't about the three of us being on some sort of like know-it-all pedestal. I mean, it was like everyone has something to give to everyone else. And so it was neat to see you all encourage one another, offer suggestions for ways you can kind of overcome an obstacle. So that was really sweet time. I felt like that, to see that, like, that's community happening in real time. So that was really sweet. I'd like to open this up to the rest of you on the call. Rosemary and Carrie, we're glad you're here, and feel free if there's anything we haven't touched on, or if you need clarification, you can ask your questions.
Well, I loved that specific accomplishment of yours, Cheryl, of getting the 100 followers, email addresses. I was wondering if any of the others had specific things like that they were able to accomplish, so I can cheer with you.
I don't remember if there were some others that have participated in that challenge, I believe, and so that was encouraging. Diane got her Substack set up and started writing. I mean, I think she has just a wealth of information just ready to spill out, and I think she's got all of the tools in place to get that going now. What else, you guys?
So
I think
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think not everybody's wins are as measurable as Cheryl's. And we've said this multiple times already. Everyone kind of was at a different stage and had different needs or goals that they wanted to accomplish. And Cara, I think Diane was a good example, because just getting her Substack set up was a gigantic win. That was something that had been holding her back. and the technical aspect had been intimidating, and she overcame that, and she learned technical things, and she even went beyond Substack and learned some Canva and you know, like, so that's not necessarily a number that we can measure, but that is a definite win. And I feel like each mentee definitely had things like that, things they overcame that were holding them back, and goals that they did meet by the end of the launch lab.
Very cool. Yes, I didn't necessarily mean anything with numbers, but just things like this one launched her own website, or that one figured out her perfect writing schedule, or whatever. I was just curious.
One of the assignments was, our suggestions was, if you don't have a lead magnet or a reader magnet, something to offer somebody in exchange for their email address. And that was something I had never thought about, because my website isn't set up to sell anything, or I'm not in business. I always thought of a lead magnet as something you needed to help drive business to your website, but it's really just kind of a reward for somebody sharing, you give them valuable content in exchange for them sharing their email address with you. So for me, I was able to, it's not finished yet, but I was able to figure out, well, I write about random stuff, or how do I make a lead magnet out of something that I don't have any particular platform at this point, but clarifying a reader and a message helped me to say, well, what would somebody, and that was one of the things I asked the lady I went out to coffee with. I was like, what would entice you to give somebody your email address? What could I give you, and that would be helpful, or worth something like that. So I got some insight there, and then I'm doing some brainstorming about, maybe it's a list of prayers that are pre-written, or something like that. It doesn't have to be anything really exotic, but starting to think about in my personal realm. It's not up on my website yet, but I am working on, okay, I've got a lead magnet idea, now let's develop it. So then it's some of the writing time is spent doing that, and there are some things like that I'm just help me feel like it's another way to serve my reader by providing something valuable that they would download, or sort of thing. So I considered that a win.
Big win. Big win. Yeah, Kathy just really came into her own, I think. And I think she's at the point where she's got all the tools, and she's still working. Like we left the launch lab open for these women. We encouraged them as we went through it, like try and get your homework done by this time, so that you can get the feedback and the personalized attention that you should have and deserve. But if you can't, we're going to leave this space open for you so that you can return to these lessons and complete them at your leisure. So Carrie, were you going to ask a question earlier?
I was. So, sorry, I was dealing with a emergency computer issue for my dad, so I couldn't get on until you may have already covered this, but so this is a 6-month program, and you had one teaching and one coaching, and like 2 things. Each month, I'm assuming, had a different topic. Could you say what those were, and you probably already did, but maybe repeat it? And then what is the cost of that?
Yeah, let me pull it up.
Yeah, because somehow I missed it even when it was happening in January. But again, dealing with another emergency then, so
Yeah. So in January we did Write the Vision. Well, I guess I was looking back at our launch sequence, and they're the same names, but January was Write the Vision, and January and February. And so we broke up that Habakkuk 2:2 verse, write the vision, make it plain, so that she who reads may run with it. And so we talked about we talked about how to write for God's glory and get to know our reader and message in those 2 months. And then in March and April, we did Make It Plain. And so that's when we really focused a lot on the branding elements of making it plain, and also getting some of our brand language down. And then in May and June that She May Run was really dedicated to, you know, how to build a platform that and promote that blesses people, and it's not about self-promotion. And then also how to continue on with community and some of the pitfalls around community. We also had challenges every month. So, or was it every month or yeah, with every month we had homework and or challenges. So we had the get your first 100 subscribers was a challenge. We had a write for 30 days challenge. And what was the other one, ladies? I forget.
The content planning.
Yeah,
Yes.
the content buckets.
Yeah. So we kind of separated those out with the appropriate module. So that was how we divided up the 6 months. So now next year we're gonna keep that same general flow. We're gonna be making a little bit of like moving the furniture around a little bit, but we're gonna keep that same flow. And it was $179 a month was the price.
And that was instead of the Writers Block, right?
And it included the writers.
The Writers Block.
Yes.
And yeah, each month we had one teaching, and then 2 weeks later we had a group coaching.
Yeah, so it was 2 touch points per month for about 2 hours together.
And then there's a separate space on the Writers Block for the Launch Lab. So we had like our own internal block feed where we could post things that were just for each other, the mentees, the mentors, to look at and give feedback to, that was outside of the block. One of the challenges for me was to actually put a messy first draft out for like general comments.
Yeah.
Most of it I did in the Launch Lab, but I had to put one out on the Inklings pub. So
Yeah, and I think we gave that to you, Kathy, because she was saying how she kind of her writing process was kind of stunted, wasn't it? Like you were just having a hard time. Like she makes her first paragraph perfect before she makes her second paragraph perfect. And so we challenged her. We're like, okay, you need to put out a messy first draft. And she did that. So that was really great. Well, we want to thank you guys so much for being here with us. It's been fun to just kind of casually talk about what the Launch Lab was. We are looking forward to relaunching this again in the fall, and again, well, officially kicking off in January of 2025. So you'll hear more about it as we get closer, but we really appreciate you guys joining us.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
take care. Bye.